So I think this is kind of a great place to start, just to kind of give people a little history on how we actually know each other and met. So for the High Phrase people, we have Charlene Sayo joining us today over Zoom, and Mike's still working on the technical side of things over here for something.
Why is that demeanor? Is that normal?
Yeah, it's kind of trying to put us in frame.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So Roots, Rhymes, and Resistance. We got a real kick out of that because we're just starting to kind of focus on the hip hop podcast. And if you could give us some perspective as to what you guys were trying to build at that time with Ugnayan.
Oh, okay. Okay, so a long time ago, and this is
nice.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, okay. Well, this is how Arif and I met. A very long time ago, more than 15 years ago. I was a member of the Filipino-Canadian Youth Alliance, and Jean-Marc Daga, our very good friend, was also a member. And at the time, we had just launched the Philippine-American War Campaign in Vancouver, and we were trying to understand and celebrate the history of our Filipino ancestors' resistance against American imperialists and basically American imperialism. And so one of the events we wanted to do was organize a show for Asian Heritage Month. And I had just returned from LA for a visit, and I'm friends with Bamboo and Kiwi and Faith and Tia and all those guys down there. And and I went to their shows, and when I came back, I was like, I want to organize something like that. So when we talked about within the Filipino Canadian Youth Alliance about a show, I just kept thinking about my trip to LA and the energy that was there with the shows that I went to, and I said, why don't we do something like this? And for a few days, my head kept thinking Roots, Rhymes, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, let's call it Roots, Rhymes, and Resistance. And so it was born. It got really exciting, but it was funny because it was really just more like a poetry night. It was in a small coffee shop, and we didn't know if it was going to grow. We just kind of threw it together. And then we decided that the next year, members of the Asian Heritage Month Society, because we did it unofficially as part of Asian Heritage Month, they heard about the show and they wanted to incorporate it as part of the lineup. So they actually gave us a lot of resources. I mean, not money, but they were like, we can get you guys a venue. And so we were able to throw, we were able to help, to hold that show pretty much every year for about 10, 11, 12 years. For about 10 years, at the Western Front, several years at the Western Front, and then at different high schools after that. So then that's how we met.
Yeah, and it was incredible. So
that's a bit of the back.
Yeah, because I never came across so many motivated young people all moving towards one cause. It's amazing because in the Indian community, it's pretty fractured amongst the youth as far as what people believe and what they choose to support and what they want to fight for. But with you guys, I was honestly, it was overwhelming because everybody was on the same page. Everyone was speaking the same language. Everybody was fighting for the same thing. And I think the biggest thing that caught my attention was everybody was motivated. And that's such a hard thing to do, to motivate a lot of people working towards the same goal. So is this kind of like the roots for you for organizing? Is this where it kind of started for you?
Yes and no. I mean, my parents are activists. I mean, my father was part of he was a youth leader during the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines, and he was actually in prison for a year. So he went to prison. He was quite young. He was 21. He had just turned 21, and he stayed there for a year. And then when he came out of prison, he laid low. But then when my mother sponsored him to Canada, he didn't really want to come here. He wanted to keep organizing. I mean, the whole reason why he went to prison anyway was because he was already known as a student leader in the region that he lived in, and him and his organizing friends were actually on their way to the mountains. They were going to join the armed guerrilla movement because that was the safest place for them to be. So they were actually on their way there, but they were caught. The military had raided their safe house one night, and so he went to prison. But he didn't want to come to Canada necessarily. He wanted to keep organizing because the dictatorship didn't actually fall in the Philippines until 1986.
Right.
But my mother told him that, there's Filipino Canada, and she had already met or had heard already of some people who were doing like solidarity work in Montreal. So slowly, my parents started to get organized. They met some other like political exiles from the Philippines who were organizing in Montreal, and then they just continued. So my brothers and I grew up like this. I mean, we grew up going to rallies and going to rallies, going to conferences. My parents would have meetings, like a lot of meetings at our house. Like I have insomnia, and I think it's because of that, like just staying up really late as a kid. Yeah. Because my parents, like the meetings would get really rowdy because there were just debates, like political debates and all that, and
passion, yeah.
And so that's just how we grew up. It was quite normal. My parents would even attend like rallies when teachers would be striking for better wages. So they were supporting everything as well. So that's how we grew up. So it was quite normal.
Sorry, how many brothers and sisters did you have? Did you grow up with?
I have two younger brothers.
Two younger brothers? So you're the oldest of three.
One's younger. I'm the oldest of three. My brother Carlo is a year younger than me, and then my youngest brother is 11 years younger, which is weird because I look at my youngest brother Andrew, and I for some odd reason I think that he was involved, in the same way. And so every time we talk, I'll like look at him and go, "Why don't you know this? Like, don't you remember this is what we did?" And he was like, "I was 6." Like, "Oh, right. You weren't that old yet." So he was. So it's just funny, but he did come along. He was also at rallies as well, and my parents like let all of us skip school if we wanted to go and attend a rally. So we grew up like that. It was pretty normal.
Yeah, shout out Carlo. Wow, it's been forever since I've seen him too.
So who in your who out of the three is more like Manny?
Is more like my father?
Yeah. Who out of the three is the most similar to Emmanuel?
I think, well, it's funny because I think I'm more like my dad and my mom, but I'm more like my dad because we have the same interests. Like we both love to read books and we both love to write and debate, although we don't always agree on things, which is really funny. So we do butt heads quite a bit. I do know where he stands. I think he knows where I stand. So sometimes we're like cats that circle each other, we try not to push each other's buttons. But I'm more like my dad, I think, in that way. And in terms of his website, the Manny Papers, like I'm the one that also edits a lot of his writings.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm also trying to push him to publish more of his stuff as well. So I think in that way, I'm like my father. And then in many ways, I'm like my mother. She's more like the mover and shaker. So like my dad is like, he's a big dreamer. Yeah, thanks.
Holy,
she'll push.
Yes.
Like I don't need to know your mother. I'm glad you're to be scared of her. Okay, and that's a good thing. That's not because I have all strong women in my life. All my women boss me around. But I read about your mom, and I'm like, oh, that's a cookie you don't want to mess with.
That's a really powerful.
No, you don't want to.
That you put together, being able to be so honest, and I think especially because I think we almost create a false narrative of mother and daughter, mother and son relationships are this beautiful, wholesome thing all the time, and you really went to a really deep place.
Yeah, no, we're like. Yeah, no, it's funny because I started a webcomic about my grandmother, and so it really is just like there's just 3 generations of us just like fighting. Like the first webcomic that I published, it was really about my mother told me this time when she and my grandmother got into a fight, and for some odd reason I was like 3 years old and I jumped in the fight as well. So there's like 3 generations of like a little girl and 2 women screaming at each other. Yeah, I was the cone, and my mother and my grandmother is like the volcano, because I'm like the baby volcano. I'm the cone, and so I just couldn't get that out of my mind that there's like 3 generations of women just like screaming at each other, and so my grandmother and my mom were like butting heads, fighting over the fact that my grandmother said like my mother had to take care of her younger brother for like the rest of his life, and they were fighting that way, and apparently I jumped in and defended my mom and told my grandmother to like get out of the house.
Wow.
which is kind of fun. But yeah, apparently I kept screaming at my grandmother because she was like screaming at my mom, so it was just like in some weird way, in this dysfunctional way, it was like a lover's quarrel, but in a really weird way. So there was like a lot of love involved, like me defending my mom and my grandmother defending her son and my mom defending like her honor. So it was just, there was all this love and conflict. So I do come from a family of women that will really fight and scream. I am a bit different. My grandmother and my mother will scream, and they're fiery. I'm a little bit more cold. So, but they are. I mean, my mother is a very tough woman, and she does run like she is. I consider the matriarch now, but when she was around my grandmother, she did not push my grandmother around. Like there was no way you could push my grandmother.
Mamong. What's her name? Mamong.
Yeah. Mamang. Mamang means grandmother in Ilonggo. Yeah, Mamang.
Dude, it sounds like a movie character, like a mamong, like you just hear mama, and she just appears from the shadows.
Yeah, well,
and berates you. Hey,
is she still here with us?
No, she passed away. She passed away quite a long time ago, but I still feel like she's with us, especially now that
sounds like it.
I'm trying to write like some of her stories. Yeah, so she's, I'm learning that she was a really tough lady, but she also really loved like dressing up and making costumes, and she threw monthly dance parties for seniors.
Wow.
Like,
for her.
like that's what I'm finding out. And when I mean yeah, she would throw dance parties like every month, and my mom said it wasn't like this little thing. It was like this big, huge party every month where everybody had to dress up, and my grandmother said like, oh, she just wanted to dance with her friends. So, but she was a tough lady. She pretty much raised like 6 children on her own, and she was really small, but she was tough. Like I was scared of her, so I was scared of her until she passed away.
So the entire comic book idea was conceptualized after her passing.
After her passing, yeah, it actually just started when I was interested in my mother's like fashion sensibilities from the 1970s. And I thought that I was going to do a project where I would kind of replicate her clothes, like the best, like, her best outfits of the 70s, and then I would try to make them an updated version. So when I started researching and asking my mother, like, more about her outfits, I realized that a lot of her clothes my grandmother had sewn for her. And of course, my grandmother was a seamstress, and we all knew that she was like, she taught everybody in her family to sew, so there was no way I could do this project without looking back at my grandmother, and that's when my mother told me more stories about my grandmother, like stories I didn't even know. So it was pretty incredible just like finding out, and so I kind of shelved the project about my mom's fashion sense and just focused more on my grandmother. So yeah, because she was a tough old lady. Like, I just have to tell you this.
I was going to ask you, tell me a story about her.
Okay, so. So many, but it's no longer available on Amazon Prime. You have to pay for it. But my grandmother had been a member. She volunteered for so many groups and organizations that she was awarded like all these medals and certificates. And she was a real like a top volunteer for Meals on Wheels. That organization that delivers food to seniors. Yeah. So when I would visit my grandmother, as a teenager, my grandmother would be preparing food, and we're like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I have to prepare food for the seniors. So we're like, what are you going to do? She's like, I'm going to deliver food. And she's like, 70 years old. And we're like, shouldn't people be delivering food to you? She's like, no, I'm not old. But anyway,
that's funny.
Meals on Wheels, like A Loving Spoonful, which she was also a volunteer of, had a TV show. And it was like a cooking show that featured grandmothers, and my grandmother was one of the guests on the 5th season, the first episode of the 5th season.
Crazy.
And it's really funny because she's you know, the host is this really nice guy. He's trying to be like overly cute, but he's trying to really warm up to my grandmother and trying to get her to like talk, and it's like it's not a problem for my grandmother to talk. So as she's cooking, she's very small, like she's tiny like me, and she's got this beautiful red ruffled dress on. And anyway, in one part of the episode, she reveals that she's ambidextrous. She can, that she's ambidextrous.
I looked up Loving
she can,
Spoonful,
like,
and I found a video with a woman with a ruffled red dress on. And we're like, oh, as soon as you said that, we had a ruffled red dress.
Yes, that's her. But in the episode, she's chopping an eggplant, and she's got these 2 knives, and I didn't know this, but she was ambidextrous, so she can use her left and her right hand, and she had good command. So she's chopping the eggplant, and the host is impressed and is like, oh, give me a try. I want to try that. He can't chop it. Like, the dude can't have, left hand is completely useless. So my grandmother watches him, watches him, and then all of a sudden she starts like going, she gets like really impatient. She's like, I can't do it. She's like, look, you're trying, but you can't. And she kind of just like moves him out of the way. And I was like, oh yeah, that's her. So there's just parts in the episode where she's very charming and she's laughing, but then, you know, when the spotlight is taken away from her, she's kind of like, she takes it back quite aggressively. And yeah, and just to let you know, like, the reason why I called it The Adventures of Montreal Beauty Queen is because in the episode, my grandmother had put up a picture of her, like, in the background, where it's like my favorite picture of her. She's dressed up as a queen. She's got this red dress with this enormous tiara. And I have it, and when she passed away, that was like the one picture I wanted. So the host asked her about this picture, like, oh, what was this all about? And so she explained, and she said, you know, this was a Halloween party, and I was thinking about my costume, and I realized, oh my gosh, I could be a queen. And then she gets really serious, and she looks at the camera, and she goes, and so I became a queen.
Oh my!
I was like, yes, you did. So it was I think that attitude where she was just like, I'm the queen, and
it's crazy.
You know, that's it. Awesome. Like I'm just the queen.
You know what's funny? Like, I've done a lot of weddings, and I've done a lot of Filipino weddings. Mm-hmm. And one thing I've always noticed about the Filipino people is their ability to love one another, and the way that they connect all as a family. And the way that, like, you can have 20, 30 cousins and brothers and sisters, whatever, and everybody knows the inner details about everyone. Like, there's this strange connection that North Americans don't understand. Am I lying, or that's the kind of the feel that I get? Why is that with Philippine culture?
About having connections and knowing each other?
Just more than any other culture, they roll as a unit. They're like, everything is like a unit, you know, like you go have a party, you invite all your cousins and everybody, you don't exclude people. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because I think if you're part of a diaspora community, everybody is your family. Yes. And that's just how it is. I mean, that's how my grandmother organized her parties. It wasn't just parties where it was for seniors. Like, my grandmother was like, no, everybody went, like little kids went, teenagers went. And I think, yeah, if you are part of a diasporic community, you are going to come together because that is your extended family. And in the Filipino community, like many other immigrant communities, you don't have, you know, everyone's your aunt and uncle, and everyone's your cousin. And it's like a weird concept to explain to people who aren't part of that community. But it's like all of my mother's friends are my aunts, and we call them that. We call them titas and titos.
Titas and titos.
You don't differentiate.
Well,
yeah.
Because it took me a long time to get to this place and understand this, because our people were displaced as well. And it took me a long time to understand that we literally call everybody cousin. Every single person we encounter is cousin.
Yeah.
You know, everyone's dad is an uncle, and everyone's mom is an aunt, and every older person is a grandparent. there literally is no distinction. And when you said that right now, it's all displaced populations, and they all want to kind of make sure that their tribe is everybody that looks, acts, and feels like them, right? And when you said that, it just made me kind of think that outside of a handful of maybe European communities that were displaced, Canadians and Americans would never understand this feeling, because they can trace back generations and generations of their population going back, 300-400 years. And in my community, at least, I can't go back beyond my great grandparents because they didn't even know their own legal names. They didn't have a legal actual name. They were just whatever name that the British could translate that they were being told is what ended up their name, and they couldn't translate anything. They had no idea what the language was. And I don't think there's ever a way to bridge that gap. I don't think there is.
Yeah, and I think that just if you are part of like displaced or diasporic communities, you're looking for a family because you're so far away from your own. Nice. And my father, he told me when he first arrived to Canada, what he said he really missed was that he can go anywhere in the Philippines. Like, he could go to Manila and he could still find someone that's related to him somehow. Crazy. And he could feel safe. And he said he didn't really feel that when he came to Canada. It was only really until, he started meeting other Filipinos. But yeah, I think everybody is with everyone and knows everybody and knows everything about everyone. It also means that there's a lot of gossip going on as well.
Oh, really?
Always. That, so.
Well, it's interesting on a smaller scale. On a smaller scale, when I was first introduced to you and your brother and everybody that was in the youth community that you guys were building, everybody knew everybody within like 2 or 3 people. Yeah. And everybody had their own unique relationship with everybody.
I noticed that too.
It's amazing. It's amazing to be able to connect with people like that. You have a really well-written piece about American imperialism on your website and how the education system was introduced into the Philippines in a way that essentially eliminated your own cultural, traditional belief. Kind of the same thing that they did in North America with the indigenous populations. It's almost like a weaponized tactic to remove the education of themselves first. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because I know I'm totally destroying your work the way you wrote it. So as far as what that meant, the introduction of it, and how we are where we are currently.
Well, I think that if you look in terms of education, that's just part of any colonial mandate and tool. I mean, that's not unique to the Philippines. It's very common in all territories and countries that have been colonized, where the colonial masters will impose a certain education, but only really at first to the elites. So in the case of the Philippines, the Spaniards first came and colonized the Philippines in the 1500s and educated the Filipinos, but only the upper elites. So it already created a class division. So for those who were very wealthy and were in the service of the Spanish Empire, they could go to school. Like, that was not a problem at all. But fast forward to when the Americans came and colonized the Philippines in 1899, they decided that everybody would have an education, but that it would be an American one. So the Philippines is actually quite unique, where at least in Asia, all of the entire Philippines is educated in American education from kindergarten until university. Wow. So English is actually one of the official languages in the Philippines. And so if you think about 150 some years or almost 150 some years of American colonialism, it really does change you, because you start thinking in very Western ways. You start thinking about, America essentially. But it does destroy your sense of nationhood, because you don't really know who you're serving. And that is the whole entire goal of colonialism, is to serve somebody else. It's to serve your colonial masters. It's to serve Western powers and not necessarily your own national interests. So, for example, I mean, my parents' generation, so many of them were named after Hollywood stars. like after Marilyn Monroe or Rock Hudson. There's
Grace.
even many who've been named after, Grace Kelly, or named after even like American presidents. I mean, it's weird to me that I know 2 Ethels after Ethel,
Ethel Merman.
Ethel Merman and Ethel Kennedy. And these aren't like old women; they're like relatively young. And I'm like, how did you get the name Ethel? Like you're not. They're like, oh my dad was like obsessed with the Kennedy. So it's quite common. Like that is just quite common. I mean, I met a guy named Rock Hudson. Like his first name was Rock Hudson.
Yeah, and I've met Filipino guys named Elvis.
That's
Elvis.
Right?
I've met a couple of Elvises.
Interesting.
So I mean, I think the sense of it's a borrowed culture in a way, but you are extremely westernized, that it's hard to imagine what your country can be if you don't to think beyond this colonial mentality.
Of course.
So I mean, I've written a lot about that, and I still see that kind of colonial mentality played out today. And I think it's that colonial mentality, again, is not unique to Filipinos, but you'll see it where, there's this aspect that being lighter skinned is better. You have to be taller. You have to have a higher nose. Like a Western ideal of beauty and looks is idealized. So that's that's really what happens when a country is colonized mentally and through its education system.
That's
but
amazing.
The education system is it's so westernized that it's hard for, I think, Filipinos to even imagine what it's like to build its own national industry, that it's just thinking of moving abroad because, America is the better place to be, or anywhere outside the Philippines is better.
So you take that 1899, the inception of the colonial education, and now where we are at today with Duterte and essentially a failed state. If you could be the person making the decisions and just have that switch to be able to change the Philippines into something that looks like a country that has a future, how do you see that? What would you see?
Well, one would be getting rid of all, shutting down the U.S. bases, really shutting them down. Because one, they're still quite active, and they're going to be there for as long as any reactionary government is there. So I would get rid of the U.S. bases so they wouldn't have any control of the Philippines. And then I would really start building the national industries. The Philippines was able to really produce, rice. Rice is being imported in the Philippines, actually. Rice. The Philippines is a rice-growing country, but they don't grow rice for themselves. They have to bring it in from, Thailand.
It's weird.
So really building its own national industries, and there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't. They have all the resources. They have a lot of manpower to do that. But it would really be to nationalize the industries and get rid of this export labor policies wherein the biggest export coming out of the Philippines is really migrant labor. That shouldn't really be the case. You shouldn't be educating your people for them to only leave. And so that's why when Filipinos are educated in the Philippines, they're not meant to stay. So many Filipinos, for example, who are studying in the medical field, they study more first world diseases than third world diseases because they're not expected to stay. So it would really be building industries where Filipinos could really stay and not have to leave because that's how the country is set up. And then I would also really build, and I think it's one of the big things that's going on right now in the Philippines, is to have a better rehabilitation drug laws.
Yes.
The way Duterte is handling drugs right now, I mean, what the hell? You're just killing people that you suspect.
It's open season in the Philippines with Duterte.
They're basically taking out drug dealers.
Users. Users.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're not. I mean, the thing is is there a drug problem in the Philippines? Yeah, because the president is making a drug problem in the Philippines. It's not even people, they're just, if they're users and they want to get clean, okay, so let's build those centers, those rehab centers that can do that. You don't go and kill people. That's not, it's an It is, because there's been children that have also been killed as well. So
yeah. So I would say that it's almost mandatory that Duterte serves. I mean, not just Duterte. There's plenty of right-wing dictators across the planet, but there should be.
Yeah.
We need to start seeing symbols of actual action being taken by, like, governments that actually cause punitive damages and put people in prison, not just symbolically have someone be punished, but actual jail terms, so that there's actually a standard set right now across the world. And we've had this conversation with a few people. It's crazy to me that it comes up again, but right-wing dictatorships across the planet have these weaselly, slimy, kind of spineless men propping up these countries. And I can never understand how the majority of the male and the female population can support such spineless, weak men. These are not people you would ever want to associate with if you were, going to school or at work. These are the kind of people you would want to be the furthest away from. But it seems like this is what's the figurehead almost everywhere across the planet right now.
Yeah.
Slimy.
I mean, I think it's also just the reflection of the world in terms of, like, who's in power as well. So even though I think Duterte is, like, I mean, look at him. He's like, and all of his goons that work with him. I mean, I'm like, you guys are not the standards of, like, any kind of human form in my way. But he's there because there's so much corruption as well, and it's being propped up by also external forces like the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is going to work with somebody like Duterte because they serve his interests as well. So, you can't just take down Duterte. You also have to take down, other powers as well. Yes. But if you could shake it up in the Philippines, because it's still a geopolitical military base for the U.S. So if the power structures in the Philippines falls, then, I mean, it will only make America put in another puppet, but you have to keep intensifying those contradictions to really make all the powers collapse. I mean, that's what happens to empires anyway. Yeah. I mean, they fall within, but also because everybody else fights against them.
Sure. And see, this could be like a really serious problem because geographically, China's trying to take control of the entire region of their South China Sea and everything else in the area. So this could potentially lead to a really big conflict if specific powers come into play, right?
Yeah. I mean, in Asia, there's always been a power play with those big countries. Like Japan was doing that, pre-World War II. I mean, they were already legitimizing and building up their power. I mean, Japan is such a small country, but it's very powerful. And before World War II, they were isolating themselves because they were literally preparing for a world takeover, which is what they tried to do in World War II. I mean, they occupied the Philippines for 3 years. They went to war with Korea. They were also trying to snatch up all the power in Asia as well. So, there's always
pretty close too. It's pretty damn close. Yeah.
So there's a lot of there's always that conflict, and so it's always going to be I'm not going to say like bigger countries, but like more powerful nations that will try to really control certain regions. And so, you've always seen it with like China and Japan in Asia, and then the U.S. also really trying to like claim there because it's the Asia is, I mean, if you control all of Asia, you control all of the Pacific, and essentially, so you have to control some, like the country like the Philippines.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of terrifying to watch how majority of the world can see what's happening with Uyghurs in China, and absolutely nothing can be done about it. Internationally, you could take all the coalitions across the planet, and absolutely nothing can be done about it.
Well, I think that like more people have to. I mean, it's hard with the pandemic as well, but I think the coalition building and then the raising of awareness has to keep going. It's not going to be easy, and I think that things are going to get like there's just going to be more violence and brutality and oppression around the world. I mean, there are some improvements, but I think that you'll see things getting worse before, as they say, things get better. But then you just have to keep going. I don't know where this world is going, actually. But
can I tell you where it's going?
I can only.
No.
Can I tell you?
Where is
I
it
already
going?
know. Okay?
Where?
And we've talked about this on previous episodes, okay? And you are about to prove me correct. Without you even knowing, you're about to prove me correct. I said that the powers have gone from way back with the old white male, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then it has progressed into people of color gaining power, which it will happen, well, complete power over ourselves and over, having an equal say in life. And the next power where we're going is total woman control. We need the ladies to take over the world and start running shit like mom or like a fucking powerful, sensible fucking woman. Okay? Am I right or am I not right, Charlene?
I gotta agree.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, I think that if women do take over, I think that the perspective would be different. It would be more like life affirming.
Yes.
Because I just see right now that the male powers, they're only set out to destroy. Like, I don't see them building
100%.
anything. And it's like, you can't, like, okay, fine, if you want to destroy something, at least have a plan to build something. But I don't see that. I mean, you see it in Brazil where Bolsonaro is like burning up the Amazon. I'm like, what are you going to do when that is all gone? You can't replace the Amazon. It's gone. Like, he doesn't seem to care. He's not, like, looking forward. Duterte just seems to be killing everybody that he, like, everybody and anybody, children included. And it's like, for what reason? Like, why would you do that? I mean, Trump is now gone, but you could see, like, the disasters that he created in the 4 years that he was president. It's like, what the hell was he doing? Like, there's no building and there's no preservation. It's all just about destroying. So I do think that women, when it comes to women's leadership, there is this perspective of preservation, looking at it the long term, because I think women, and I mean, I'm generalizing here, but a lot of times we have this sense of time, like time is always running out, and we've been socialized, to always know that, say, hey, you're going to have your period soon. It's like there's always something that we have to look forward to ahead. Usually it's not always nice or fun, but we just always have this sense that you have to preserve something. It has to be preserved. There's something that, like, it has to be life affirming. If something gets destroyed, it has to be replaced somehow, holistically as well. So I do think that women do have that perspective that you just can't go and destroy things and not have a backup plan. Like, you need to have plan A, B, and C. And then I think that if there is, like, if things do go to shit, you have to, like, need something. Like, there's always a plan ahead, and even if it's just like something really small, it has to grow somehow. From, like, what I said, like, in terms of male leadership that we've seen around the world, in terms of the dictatorships, I don't see what they're doing that's going to keep their people alive. I feel like it's more like destruction, and that's not the way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, with climate change not slowing down at all, and it's going to be most devastating on island nations. And island nations are disappearing across the planet. Sea levels literally swallowing islands and creating climate refugees. Horrible. And this is climate refugees in a way, for the first time that we're seeing it, at least in our civilized world, because we've never had to see people leave a place where they've lived because the ocean swallowed it. I mean, I'm sure islands have disappeared, but not with mass migrations. Yeah. So now we're in this place where we're gonna see it change more and more dramatically. And I hate being so, depressing and dark and destitute about our end point. But it seems like, just yesterday they had the shooting at the grocery store, right?
Yes.
Boulder, Colorado.
In Colorado.
Yeah, dude just walked in and just started sniping people. And then the week before we have the mass murder at the spas in Atlanta. And
COVID crazy.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it seems like this internal, especially in North America, there's a lot of tension amongst POC and everybody else. And it seems like this is only going to get worse and not better.
Well, it's because we base...
Yeah, I think it is.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to set you up, but...
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, because we base our happiness on materialism. and we base our happiness on other people making us happy. Not us, I'm saying, but the majority of North Americans. That's what they need. They need other people or other things to make them happy. When that's taken away, you're left with yourself, and that sucks. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, go. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, but I think in the perspective in the States, I mean, I think it's going to take a really long time for them to recover. As we could see, I mean, I'm still not over what happened in Atlanta. I mean, that affected me deeply. Like, it was Thursday where I think I felt like the depression, just because it was, 8 people that died, 6 were Asian women, and it was like it was like everything that happened, like the circumstances of the shooting. It was just it was exactly like the reality, like my reality, and all my the history of me being sexually harassed just like came up. And I think it was like that all Asian women faced.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was so dark. But then you don't even have a chance to really grieve and then recover. And then the Colorado shooting happened. And I'm just like, what is it? Like, you guys keep topping yourselves with like these mass murders. And so I don't know what's, I think it's just going to get worse. One, there's too much like gun access in America. I mean,
100%.
if they can get it legally, but they can also just as get guns illegally just as quickly.
Yes.
Like that guy, the shooter, Kyle, what's his name? Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, he was
Carl
a 17-year-old kid who spent his stimulus checks. Yeah, like he spent his stimulus checks and got like guns and went to a Black Lives Matter rally and killed 2 people. So I do think it's just going to get worse. I don't know how America is going to grapple with that, or even with the rest of the world. But I think the violence is just going to really exacerbate. I don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, in one way, I feel relieved that our gun laws are quite good here, but also our gun laws could also change quite quickly, depending on the circumstances. I mean, we could go the American route right now, so I'm also not. I'm very cautious when I say that I feel safe in terms of our gun laws, because I know that the reality is that could all change rather quickly.
And yet, I mean, you can see it in Canada as well. And this, I mean, I think this illusion is starting to break that Canada is not a racist country, but you can see it in Canada as well. There are literally people protesting anti-racism protests. So there's anti-racism protests happening in Alberta, and people are coming out to protest anti-racism.
Okay, but
so
are there 2 cultures, or is it just one culture?
Well, there's a group of people of color. And then there's rednecks that show up.
No, but the people that are protesting the anti-racism. Okay, so does that make them racist then?
Right?
Well, no, but I'm just wondering, because they're protesting anti-racism.
Right?
So does that mean they're pro-racism or they're pro-anti-racism?
I think they're protesting their right to be racist.
Holy, that just blows.
You have to let me be racist.
That is a new level of redneck that I have ever seen before. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Shocking. How do you think we've survived so long with Canada having this illusion of not being racist?
That's crazy.
How have we survived it? It's in our education system, and it's also in our federal policies. Like the Multiculturalism Act is an act. It's an actual political act cemented in our laws that the Trudeau government, Justin's father, implemented in the 70s, 1980s. So with this Multiculturalism Act, it officially states that Canada is a multicultural country, and for some odd reason, that kind of made us all think that we were free of racism. So I mean, and that's how I grew up remembering that act would come out. But then when you really think about it, you're like, but what does that actually mean? Yeah, it's in our laws, but what does it actually mean in practice? Because we're multicultural, but that doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. I mean, there are countries where you can be multicultural and you could be free of racism, or at least racism is quite low. The tension is quite low. Yeah. The only country that I've ever seen that happen was in Cuba, where it is a multicultural country, and I'm not saying it's a perfect society, but their idea of racism is very different. I don't think that they don't really, I think culturally it's just very different. I think that after the Cuban Revolution, they all saw themselves as Cubans, not as a black Cuban or a white Cuban. or a light-skinned Cuban or a dark-skinned Cuban. I think they saw each other as Cubans. And I have a friend who's from Cuba. He's a very dark-skinned black Cuban. And his observation after having lived here in Canada for 2 years is that he said that he found it quite bizarre that people of color are always putting themselves, not themselves necessarily, but there's always a narrative that they're inferior. And it's not to say that we see ourselves as inferior, but we say like we're the more oppressed class. Where he's like, in Cuba, I would never say that. Like, I'm a dark-skinned black man, but that never occurs to me that I'm more oppressed than, because I think that it's a very different society there. So,
and do you think that's partially because they
Canada,
do you think it's because they haven't had that American influence over all these years? They haven't had a colonial power imprint?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is one of the benefits of having that the Cuban Revolution. I mean, capitalism is worming its way now in Cuba, so there are a lot of tensions there rising, especially with the younger generation of Cubans. But I would say that in a country that hasn't really been too entrenched in capitalism, at least in the last 50 or 60 years, there is something to say about seeing yourselves equal to everybody else. So I think in a multicultural society, and I think most countries are, especially Western countries where there's large numbers of diasporic and migrant nations just flowing in, you will be multicultural, but you'll also be very racist. So that's just the reality. So I think with Canada, we always just feel that we've escaped all that and that we're actually, good, kind people.
It's a hybrid.
Everybody, but
multicultural racist.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Wow. And I think that when we see something like the States, we see something really insidious, and so we never see that within ourselves. But like, racism is everywhere. I mean, look at what happened with the First Nations people. I mean, there's nations and communities that don't have like clean water.
Sad. Or internet,
how
or
is that
water,
not
or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so weird because I think for most and not, I would say almost all Indian people that have come here from Fiji or from India, wherever they ended up from, the first time we encountered racism would have been from our own people, would have been from our immediate circles. Because I think one thing that colonial powers do is they begin to model that, obviously light skin is more preferred and nicer to look at and all these associated with all these different things and clean and pure and all these different things. And it's kind of passed down the line. So obviously, there's that white supremacist structure that makes certain white people feel that they're superior. And then when you pass it down to countries that you're invading and colonizing, that is almost like a chemical that leaks off of them onto the lighter skinned ethnic groups. Yeah. And then they take that on them like, yeah, I'm lighter skinned, so I'm closer to the white people. That means I'm a little bit better. Yeah. So the first signs of racism that I ever remember encountering was literally from my own people. And I didn't understand it until I got quite a bit older, and I look back like, what the fuck? They were literally saying stuff like, yeah, he's dark. He's really dark.
Yeah, I used to hear that growing up a lot.
Yeah.
That's a strange thing to say to a kid, right? Yeah. But when you're a kid, you just kind of just take it in whatever. Would you say
that's the colonial mentality right there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean Filipinos like love lighter skinned people, like they love it. So but it is part of that colonial mentality. Like and I feel like, I mean, when I was younger I used to get really upset when I heard comments like that. Or if I heard people say like, don't go out in the sun because you'll get darker, but I'm like, yeah, but my parents are dark. I mean, I don't know what I'm gonna do about that. Like there's really nothing I can do. But I mean there isn't really. Like on my father's side, they're like, I call them like the mer people. Like they're mermaids and mermen because on my father's side there's a branch on my father's side of the family where they're fishermen and they just like live by the sea and their skin is like dark but beautiful, and I'm just like I'm amazed by them, so I call them like the mer people on my branch on my father's side of the family. So it's like I can't do anything about that, but you can change your colonial mentality. And when I do see people who have that kind of hatred towards their own people who are maybe darker than them, I mean, I see is more like just how self-loathing they really are, like how deep their hatred is for themselves, like how conflicted they are. So it to me, I mean, I tend to stay away from them because people who are quite self-hating aren't very pleasant to be around in the first place. But I do have a lot of sympathy for them from an arm's length, and the only way that I can really deal with it is just understanding that, you know, their colonial mentality is so deep, and I don't know if they can recover from that. Like there's some people that just really can't recover.
Broken for sure. Yeah, it's that weird kind of that weird love obsession that a lot of minority communities have for the royal family as well, which is such a bizarre thing.
Yeah.
To worship the royal family as a colonized people is so strange.
Oh God. Yes, it's true.
It is so strange because I'm like, why would you have a fetish for a family that would never let you near them? Like, you would never, they would never let you in Buckingham Palace. Like,
Do you ever remember the royals? Do you ever remember the royals rolling through your town as a kid?
Yeah. No.
No, never. They never did. Or they did. They did in mine.
No.
Oh right.
Really?
They never made trips to Vancouver, or
well, to Victoria. I think
Victoria.
They did.
Yeah.
They made trips in Vancouver because Prince William was like a teenager, and I remember my classmates were going crazy when he came to Vancouver. But yeah, no, it's weird. It's weird how like the royal family. I think it's this like bizarre fantasy that you're going to marry into a royal family, but then you have somebody like Meghan Markle, who's half white, who ends up in the royal family, and then it's like we all know what happened.
What do you think of that interview with Oprah?
I mean, I didn't really watch it because I have a lot of sympathy for somebody like Meghan, and I didn't really want to contribute to like the whole thing because I just think it's such a gross situation where I think in one way Meghan really thought that she would be accepted, you know, but it's like, no, the royal family is an institution and it's a cult and it's an institution.
Could they possibly be the most racist ever on the planet in the history of the earth? What do you think is your opinion on that?
They don't say. I mean, I think that they're certainly racist. I mean, the fact that they say like they're not. I mean, when somebody jumps in and says, "I'm not racist," I mean, you're like, "Oh, okay." Then you kind of know the perspective. But I mean, it's that whole family is built on racism. Like we said, like the British Empire was the most powerful empire in the world at one point. I mean, they owned everything, you know, in the entire world, like all colonies, all countries in the world.
But you know what?
Pretty much owned by.
We slipped one past the guard. We got one in. The bloodline is tainted for life. For life. Little Archie. Little Archie's like, remember Eddie Murphy in the Golden Child? Mm-hmm. Remember the Golden Child? He was like, sir, he had to go do it. He got the Golden Child. Archie's the Golden Child for the future generation.
Yeah.
You know what though? Honestly, I can start to see now that there's some kind of a realization of people that we're just funding people's tax money is funding a fallacy, right? Mm-hmm. Even though they're the largest landowners on the planet, they don't really generate any of their own revenue anymore. The colonies diminished to a small piece, but I think they'll hopefully dissipate in the next few years, and maybe when the aliens show up, they'll take the queen back with them.
All we need is Prince William's. All we need is Prince William's son to be sterile, and then Archie will become king. Right? That's it.
That's true.
If he cannot produce,
you know what? And there could be that possibility. I mean, royal families were known to, intertwine with each other, if you know what I mean. And so I think that there are some health problems that occur every few generations. So maybe that's going to be one of them. But in terms of just to wrap up with the Meghan Markle thing, I just thought it was really crazy. And for me, at the end, was I team Meghan or not? I mean, at the end, I felt very sympathetic and sorry for her. At the same time, I was like, it's just really gross. And to me, I was just more concerned about the exposure of just how racist British society is. I mean, I think we all knew that, but the fact that they're in such denial of it, the thing that kind of not bothered me, but that I was surprised with is that British society just does not want to admit that they're racist when it's like, you guys should just own it since you guys were that is kind of your thing. You should just own it. I mean, I can understand why in Canada we don't want to own our racism. I understand that. But I mean, the Brits were like the originals, so it's like just own it. Like that's your heritage.
Yeah, it wouldn't affect them negatively anyway.
No.
I think it'd make them people that support them. So
there is nothing they can do to make us look at them more fondly ever. There's nothing.
Exactly.
So have you had a chance to?
Ed Sheeran was the closest they came.
Is he British?
Yes, Ed Sheeran is British. Yeah.
Oh,
they almost got me back. They almost got me back because of Ed Sheeran. No.
Yikes! Do you like his music that much?
Well, I sing a couple of his songs at weddings.
Right. That makes
and
sense.
one thing I gotta say also, when I go to weddings, Filipino weddings, always singer Tito wants to sing. Tito wants to sing. I'm like, oh, okay, Tito. And then 5 minutes later, they'll be like, Tito wants to sing. And I'm like, he just sang. No, the other Tito. I'm like, another Tito. Oh, it was the Jackson family up in here? What's going on?
A lot of singers, man. A lot of singers. So what originally meeting you and everybody around you, we all bonded over hip hop and connected through music. Are you still a hip hop head?
I am, but it's like funny because I mean, my taste in music kind of changes depending on my mood. I mean, last week I was listening to Tupac, but for like the last few weeks when I've been like editing my dad's like papers and all that, I've been like listening to a lot of Broadway musicals. So it kind of really depends. But I do
love a big change.
Hip hop. I love hip hop. Yeah, it depends. It really just depends on my mood. But I love. I mean, one of my favorite
top 3 Broadway musicals.
And she's a Chilean hip.
Top 3
oh my god, that I listen to consistently. So Les Miserables, that's my first. So Les Miserables, and I love that. I saw that musical like 3 times, and each time I saw it, I was just like crying. I love The Sound of Music because I think musically it's like those songs are really good. I mean, Julie Andrews couldn't quite do it, but she got close to yodeling, so she's very close. And I love to hear the soundtrack from Chicago. So I mean, they're fun songs. Wow. But yeah, so it just depends on my mood. I think if you were asking me like just other music that I also like, I mean, heavy in my rotation list would be like Anna Tijoux, because I love that Latin hip hop, even though I don't really understand what she's saying most of the time, but I love it. Broadway musicals, I love Queen. Queen is I love Queen
Queen's
so much.
Had a big comeback over the years.
I think the thing is, like, I've always liked Queen though, but it's I mean, just I think as performers, I mean, they just gave it, so you just love them.
Freddie Mercury's God.
But yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, totally. Have you guys ever seen his 1981 live performance in Montreal?
My God.
With
honestly, I showed it to my kids. I showed it to my kids because like my kids are growing up now, 20 and turning 14, and we talk about music all the time, and they understand. Obviously, they grew up on us giving them all this great music. Yeah. But I remember the first time I showed them Freddie Mercury doing that. And the crowd was like,
yeah.
Wow, they were absolutely floored.
He has such control.
There's no performer that they can watch that can do anything remotely close to that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Astonishing to watch.
Yeah, exactly. That's why. Yeah.
Greatest musical performers. Top 3. Top 3 favorite musical performers. Just so we spit them out at you. You got to be ready. You never know when they're coming.
So definitely, Freddie Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the top for me. Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
wait, can I throw another one?
Yes.
Another one. There's another one that it's kind of like, I think that like if she went around, Beyonce wouldn't be around. Okay, well, there's a lot of people who influenced Beyonce, but okay, one of my top favorite like live performers is Etta James.
Ooh.
Have you guys ever seen Etta James perform?
No. Heard.
No. Okay.
No.
Her song, I mean, okay, you guys gotta look up when she, what she does,
You're freaking out
is
right
that
now.
she aggressively, without, yeah, because I just can't believe that she does this, and I love it every time she does it. But she will aggressively flirt with the audience, and when I mean aggressively flirt, she's like, she'll stare at a guy, and she'll get up close, and she'll just be like, mwah, 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 like air kisses, and she'll do it, and she does it at every performance, and I love it. I mean, she doesn't care. I mean, I think she's just herself when she does it.
Wow.
That's where it's at for performances.
Performance-wise, I really
owning yourself in that moment. There's nothing more beautiful than what artists can pull off.
Yeah. I don't think that anybody can pull off air kisses the way Etta James does. Like,
So
there's
great.
nobody else that can do it. Like, really. And I love watching, like, the reaction videos. And, like, some young hip-hop guys will watch the Etta James, like, reaction videos. And they're kind of, like, floored. They're like, oh, my God, this woman. She's, like, giving it all to me. And so that's, I love it. And it's, like, she's kind of, like, she's almost threatening. And you're kind of just, like, thankful that there's a stage that divides her and the audience. But I get a kick out of it. So yeah, Etta James is probably one of my top favorite like live performers.
Wow. If you could only take 3 artist catalog to the afterlife, whatever you believe the afterlife is, what 3 artist catalog would you take with you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no. Okay. Oh no, that's too much.
Pressure.
Okay. Oh no, that's so much pressure. Okay. Oh my god, it is a tough one. Okay, well, like I guess like Queen.
You can
like
the whole catalog
from Queen, like that. Yeah, all. I mean, you want me to choose from any like a catalog from Queen?
No, 3 different artists.
Pack light.
3 different artist catalog.
Oh god. Oh jeez. Okay. Oh, that is just. It's so hard because there's so many.
You're right.
There is just so many. Okay, okay. The greatest hits, like I guess the catalog, the greatest hits of like Tina Turner.
Whoa, Tina!
It's the first.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yes, I was playing some Tina the other day. Just played the best of.
Oh my god!
Okay, so you got Queen, you got Tina Turner, you got one more.
Yes.
The lady who impersonates Tina is Filipina. The lady who's
the one based here in Vancouver.
This is amazing. I've done gigs with her. And I'm like, it's
long world, yo.
It's amazing. It's amazing. All right, so Tina. Queen,
and I guess
we're going old soul here, but I feel like there's something current.
Okay, and then 1977 by Anna Tijoux. That I would take her catalog just because she's an incredible lyricist, and she always she collaborates with a lot of powerful like women hip hoppers from around the world. So if you ever listen to her tracks, she totally collaborates with like Nadia Mansour, who is Palestinian British, and they do a great collaboration together. So really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that artist up now because you said it. That's good. That's dope. 2 new artists added to that.
She's great. She's great.
Yeah.
I was just
Anna
looking.
Tijoux, she's
I was just looking at Etta James, and she had a beautiful afro. Her hair was amazing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Looked like my mom's.
Her hair was amazing, and her voice was. To be honest with you, I mean, if there was no Etta James, there would be no Christina Aguilera, because Christina Aguilera totally said that it was Etta James that really influenced her. So, but Anna James is amazing. But Anna Tijoux is actually the child of Chilean revolutionaries. Her family like ran off to France, and she was born and raised there, but then went back to Chile and started her career there. So she's a very politicized hip hopper as well. So yeah, I mean, she's great.
Top 3 favorite books.
And speaks like multiple languages. Oh, geez, that's even worse.
I know.
You can't be rolling around the internet with a bookshelf looking like that and not have 3 favorite books ready to go. Come on, look at that bookshelf.
Oh, okay. Top 3 favorite. Okay. Okay. One
Can I
of
ask you
them
something? Are
is
you
The
married
Lover
or
by
anything?
Margaret. No, I'm not.
You have a boyfriend or anything?
I'm married to my books.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what I was
married
going
to
to
my
say. A
books.
guy will roll in there and be like, oh my God, look at she's so smart. Right? Nothing else will fear him.
So I think one of them is The Lover by Margaret Duras, because she writes. It was based. It was also made into a movie, but it's it's a novel. It's semi-autobiographical, but she writes about alienation in Saigon in like the most sparse prose, but it's like gut wrenching. It like punches you in the heart. So, and it's partially based on her life. So that's definitely one. 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and 100 Years of Solitude is like, I mean, I don't know. It's like the Bible of Latin America. And the first time I read it, like straight through, I like dropped it. I was like, what the fuck? Like the end, like, and the same reaction. Anybody who's read it, like, it's like Gabriel Garcia Marquez like slaps you in the face, like clobbers you with his novel, because you're like, what the hell did I just read? So, and it's also such a beautiful novel, but it's also quite engaging that you're frustrated when you read it, but you just have to be frustrated. And then I guess the third one, okay, it's gonna be a short story, based on one of my from one of my favorite artists. So it's called Never Marry a Mexican. It's a short story, almost like a novella by Sandra Cisneros.
Oh, nice.
And Never Marry a Mexican is just dripping with everything that you would see about life living on the borders of America and Mexico, and what it's like to, what a Mexican American born, how they would marry a Mexican born in Mexico, and then just the racial and the sexist conflicts that play up. But yeah, it's essentially about this woman who is trying to exact revenge on her ex-lover, and she takes like 2 generations. It's almost like pre-Gone Girl. So it's like Gone Girl. It's like the prototype of like Gone Girl. This is like before Gone Girl. So with a Mexican like flavors thrown into it. It's an incredible story, and I'm always shocked every time I read it.
So can I just say, over the years, obviously I've followed a lot of the work that you've done and the activist work that you do, and I gotta say, you've always motivated the hell out of me, seeing you always doing something towards not just work. Obviously, everyone's gotta do a 9 to 5, but working in a way that's purposeful and meaningful, and you're applying your principles to what you do in what you do in your daily life, and making that a part of who you are. We have a lot of young people that I know have intent to do things that can be monumental and life-changing and society shifting. If you could look at some of these young people today, what kind of advice would you give them if they were first starting to kind of start organizing, building movements? What kind of things would you suggest for them to be effective? She just stopped.
Oh, look at you! Look at her! You've
Learning and have a lot of humility.
There it is.
Because I do think that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this. Like, I think that when you're young.
You cut.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good.
You're back? Okay. I think that one of the things I would say is have a lot of humility and just keep learning. I think it's very easy for when you're really young, and I think that this is just part of being young, is like you tend to have a swagger. You think you know everything, and that's it. That you're just being young like that. But you also have to know that there was like a history before you, and that doesn't mean that you can't achieve what was done before you. But you have to always learn, and also just have that sense of humility. I think that there's a tendency, especially now, where I think younger people want to kind of squash whatever achievements happened in the past, like thinking that they're better than our ancestors and myself. Like, we made mistakes organizing, but that's how you learn. But I think that if you always just keep learning, and also learning the mistakes of your ancestors, and not think that you're just better than them, but learn from their mistakes, because I think that older organizers are happy to teach you their failures and say, don't do what I did.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice would really be be humble. Like you need to have that, especially if you're going to continue your activism past your youth years. You need to have that sense of humility, because when you're young, you tend to think that you're going to save the world and you're going to fix the world by the time you're 30, because that's how I think everybody just feels like you're going to do something great before 30. Then you hit 30 and you're like, oh, we still have a lot of work to do. And so you could either burn out and give up, or you can keep going in some way, whether you don't have to be a hardcore organizer, but you could try to maintain your principles and put them out, and channel it in a different way. So I think it's just really have humility and be humble and just keep learning, and just know that you're part of something bigger. Like, it's not just about you are part of something bigger.
It's huge. So would you say, if you didn't come up in a family of activists, would you I mean, it's kind of impossible to say, you kind of have like a revolution in your DNA almost?
Well, I'm wondering when she got that talk.
So.
When she got that talk from Dad, like, guess what, girl? This is what we're doing today.
Well, no, that was more like my mom. So she was more like, you're going to do this. But I think that we just kind of grew up knowing that, we're against certain systems and that people just have to fight. And I think that I just always grew up knowing that, say for the Philippines, I saw it as a poor country, but I saw it as a country of like activists. That's how I saw the Philippines. I mean, the fact that the Philippines is a tourist destination up until I was like 13 or 14, that never occurred to me. I was like, people travel there? I was like, I thought people just go there for rallies. Like I didn't know that, because that's what I was exposed to. So, and I think that people come into like organizing and activism in their own way. What I have stayed in it, I mean, like, I'm still in it. And I think that this is where I'd rather be, because I don't like the other side. I mean, huge. I don't. And so, like, who knows if I, how I would have come into activism had it not been my parents. But I think that you also reach a certain age where you can't really fall back on your parents and say, like, they pressured me. I mean, I felt that way when I was younger. But then you also come of age where like, they gave me the tools to think about it, and I also have to make my own decisions. So, I mean, I know a lot of activist kids who never stayed.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I know a lot of activist kids that stayed. So it all really just depends on their decisions and what they feel like their lives should be.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, man.
This is where
trying to be on the right side of everything all the time. It's a lot of pressure to make sure that because there's so many possibilities to be wrong, right?
Oh yeah, but there's so many. But I mean, I think like there was so much pressure too. I mean, I had to make sure I attended enough rallies. Like, Mom, Dad, did I make enough rallies for this year to get your good side? But it was like a lot of conflict, like growing up, because we clashed. But I think they tried to really make me understand and make my brothers and I understand. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure. But then at the end of the day, when you come of age, you also have to think about that as well. I mean, my parents probably would have pressured us, but they would have also understood that it's not an easy world, that sometimes capitalist pressures really don't allow you to fully commit to activism. So yeah,
kills the fight. Kills the fight. Once you become comfortable, it's very, very hard to stay motivated to fight.
Oh yeah.
And go to the protest and sit and just get arrested for civil disobedience. It's not a fun thing to do when you have a 9 to 5.
But then that's when you push those people to the creative department of the protest to make the signs.
Right.
You know what I mean? They do social media.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, everyone has a way that they can get involved, right?
So were you able to do like a deep dive into your ancestry in the Philippines outside of your immediate family?
Yes and no. I mean, on my father's side, my dad has actually documented a lot of the family tree already, and so awesome. I feel like there's more of this colorful life. Because my dad has documented, he loves to talk about it. His apparently we're descendants of Chinese pirates and Malaysian warriors, so it's very colorful in that way.
Yes, pirates.
Yeah, but then on my Yeah, I mean, that's, like my dad would just say like funny things. It's like, why do you think your cousin like behaves like this? That's the pirate side or whatever. Or he's like, oh, your cousins, because I do have very tall cousins. They're like, our Malaysian ancestors were tall, and that's where they got their height. So, but on my mother's side, it's a bit interesting because my grandmother was orphaned when she was a young child. So I really don't know anything about my grandmother's side beyond my grandmother. So there's not much of a deep dive going into my grandmother's family, which is on my mother's side at least, which is I think why it's also motivating me to do a web comic about my grandmother. I feel like I have to start mythologizing whatever little information we have about my mother's side of the family. So it's a little bit of that. Yeah.
You're continuing the family lineage, like in a weird way, right?
The stories are so important.
She's the bridge from the old way into the new digital way that every family has to eventually take, right?
Yeah.
Because from up until this century, everything was written.
Yeah, and I want to be able to tell my kids, where we came from ancestrally, but there's no bridge available from like Fiji to India. We have a whole branch of family that's there in India that we'll never know. That is almost impossible to come across. So there's like a huge, Rosie and her mom went to India a few years ago, and she said when they stepped onto the land, they immediately felt like they were at home. They immediately felt it.
Yeah.
The smell, the people, none of that mattered. The fact that they were able to step foot on the land, they just felt the connection to it. And it's so strange because we're never gonna be able to encounter that because the record keeping was awful, absolutely terrible. Yeah. Right? I asked my parents, they don't even know what their parents' legal names were. Yeah. They just had a name that they had. So,
but that'll never happen ever again. Like with all the blood records and dental records and all these, these files that are kept on people for generations and generations. No one will ever not know their origin stories or the origin of their family at one point anyway.
Yeah.
Have you ever done a 23andMe or any way they did one?
No. I haven't sent my saliva or anything yet. No.
Have you ever Short Town?
I've never done that. But I think when you go back to your comment in terms of like no records keeping and you don't have that bridge between like India and Fiji. I think that's very common for migrant nations, diasporic communities, and it makes me it reminds me of what James Baldwin, the writer James Baldwin, said when he was telling the story. James Baldwin is an incredible writer. I should have put him down as like
his voice.
There's too many.
His voice is just magic. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like you stop and you just listen, and so he was telling this story when he was in a taxi and the cab driver asked him like, where's his family from? And he said like, well, my family's he's from New York. It's like, my family's from Louisiana. And the taxi driver is like, yeah, but like before Louisiana. And he's like, well, from here. And he's just naming all these like American cities. And then the cab driver is like frustrated because he wants to tell him like, where in Africa is your family from? And then James Baldwin had to tell him, he's like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. Because this is what happened when the white man took my family. He's like, I don't know where they're from in Africa. He's like, and that's not my fault. He's like, this is what the white man has done. He goes like, all I know is that my ancestors came here as slaves. They were brought here as slaves, and we were owned by somebody whose last name was Baldwin, which is why I am the slave of Baldwin, and that is why my name is James Baldwin. Wow. And so, to me, that was like a very powerful statement for him to say, like, I don't know. And he probably doesn't know really where in Africa that his family, his ancestors are from. And for me, it was very powerful because one, he brought right up to the forefront, like, this is what slavery has done. This is what the history of slavery has done to people like me. But he also has that common history that somewhere down the line, a man named Baldwin took my ancestors and enslaved them. And so I am like essentially the slave of Baldwin, which is why I have my name. And so it's like you almost have to start there, and it's traumatic to think about, like, that's how your identity would start from, but then it's still connected to everybody else. Like there is this community, there is this family, so it's not completely blank. although the details are not going to really be there. So I do feel that, like, although you may not have that bridge between India and Fiji, there is this commonality there that I see.
Yeah.
And it is part of that long history.
Yeah, there's a huge population of Fijian people here as well. And again, everybody's cousin, everyone's uncle, everyone's aunt. And it's, I hate being conspiratorial, but it kind of feels like I'm the overarching theme of the conversation. Well, it seems like the overarching theme of the conversation when it comes to at least the pain and suffering part of it is all due to this kind of white supremacist colonial structure that's still lingering all across the planet. And that's had like a detrimental effect that has set countries back for centuries.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of, maybe we have, a couple of symbols of what a politician that looks like us could be like. We have Jagmeet Singh, potentially could be in power one day, could be a prime minister one day. I'm not going to ask you who you vote for, but is that a candidate that you look at and you see that could be for possible change?
I mean, for me, I also look in terms of their political and their class interests, because they don't necessarily have to look like me, although it would be great. But if they don't also have the same interests, then it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, in my opinion, because you have countries like the Philippines, like Duterte is a Filipino president, but like I would never vote for him. It would really, really depend. If they were genuinely had the interest of the people, then it shouldn't matter. But in some ways it does. Like when Barack Obama became the U.S. president, that was very important, and I still think he was an important president, because I think that well, in one way, I think it made America think that they were something that they weren't. But then once he was out of power, that all flipped. Did I think, like, for example, did I think somebody like Obama had the interests of all of America? I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think he was also part of the Democratic Party, which is like a very corporate party as well. So he was also serving their interests. But I think symbolically he did something. He did at least let people know that a black man could be president one day. And so we hope that, my always hope is that when I see, when I do see people of color being put in power, I do think that's important and it should be celebrated, because it took a very long time to get that person there. It took took hundreds of years and many people in many communities. So that should never be taken away. However, we also have to put their feet to the fire and make them serve the needs of the people. So
it can't just be tokenism and symbolism.
Exactly. Sure. It has to be beyond that. So that's why for me sometimes it just doesn't really matter, but it does matter. But you can have a woman president or a woman in power and not do anything for women. I mean, that's happened before. Margaret Thatcher did that in Britain. She didn't do anything. I mean, she was like besties with Ronald Reagan, and what did she do for the miners in Britain in the 1980s? She didn't do anything. So you could have it like that. So I mean, and if we're gonna talk about again a powerful woman, I mean the Queen, Queen Elizabeth, has been in power for 100 years, it seems, and it's the monarchy hasn't improved. So under her leadership.
Okay, Miss, top 3 people whose podcast you would never listen to if they had one.
If they had one?
If they had a podcast, 3 people you would never ever listen to if they had one.
Oh God, Trump! I would never listen to Trump because we had too much of him for
He's
4
getting
years.
his own social media platform, maybe.
Yeah, but him, never. I would never listen to him.
Would you friend him on his Trump?
No, God, no.
Would you give him a big T or whatever they do? Big T.
Yeah, no, not okay. So Trump, definitely not Trump. Geez, I mean, it's like everybody who I wouldn't listen to already has a platform. That's a sad thing. So, yeah, that's like the worst thing. It's like
the new Bill Clinton podcast?
He has one?
Yes, he has a new one.
No.
It's gross.
He's like, hi everybody, it's President Bill Clinton, and I'm just wanting to invite you over. And I'm like, listen to him, like, come sit on my lap, and I'll tell you all the stories that I got about the presidency. Right?
He's so, you know, it's crazy. On the way here, I mean, Rosie kind of dropped me off, and I'm talking to her, and she has this customer come into the pharmacy today, and from like across the hall, just starts yelling at her, sweetie, hey, sweetie. And Rosie doesn't play that shit. She doesn't like that stuff. She thinks it's slimy. So she calls him out in front of everybody. She's there, first of all, my name is Rosie. Don't call me sweetie. And she's lucky because she's strong and she doesn't give a fuck about what anybody thinks. And if she wants to say something, she'll say it. But, you know, there's so many situations that happen all the time, even in the smallest of ways, where you see all over TV, everywhere you can possibly look, where you see men putting women in these positions, trying to take away the control of their identities through this kind of violence. And I kind of lost my train of thought. But so we're talking about the whole idea of this constant barrage that women go through with sexual harassment and assault and things like this. And I hate saying that women should, you know, learn self-defense and know how to fight and all these different things, because that shouldn't really be asked of somebody in order to just live a life. I think a part of this can be put into like the education system, teaching kids from a young age how they should behave, how they should act. Is there something that you would possibly think of that could change this thinking, where, you know, men are just constantly being predators?
What would I change?
Yeah. Outside of changing men, because I don't think you can change a man that way. If you had a fresh group of young boys that were going to be men, is there a way you can change that thinking?
Raise them in a matriarchal society. That's what I would do.
Yes. And do you think the education system could be a part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, I think at this point, because, like, the patriarchal thinking is so entrenched, even amongst women, that you have to start over. But if you have a matriarchal society where it was just, like, all women raising children, I think that it would be different. I mean, it would totally be different. I mean, I think women, if they really want to look at the world in long term and in life affirming ways, it would be different. So I would say that, like, if the only way to raise like little boys to maybe not be predatory and to treat women equally is to just have them be raised in a matriarchal society where, you know, like the boys would be the ones who had to take on the last name of their wife, and it would be completely different. I think that, like, the marriage system wouldn't even exist, because they wouldn't be dependent on the seizure of lands. It would just be different. So I think that if it was a completely different society, I mean, it doesn't even have to be matriarchal. It just has to be a society that has completely different set of rules and values. We haven't seen that yet, and I think that, like, people are too scared to even think or even imagine what that could be. But I mean, I think you have to be at the very bottom to see that the world can be really different. Like, you know, I met women, the Dalit women from India. I met them in New York, and they're one of the lower caste women in India. Dalits, and for a lot of them, they said, like, you know, it's easy for them. They're fighting for their rights to be recognized just as normal people. And for them, they said, like, it's easy for us, although it's hard, that they keep on fighting, because they said, like, we know the other side of violence, that you don't have to be violent. Like, that's the only thing that they push forward is, you don't have to be violent towards us. So why don't we just not be violent? I mean, for them, it makes sense. And that makes sense to me. I'm like, yeah, why do we have to be violent? So I think that we could be, if our society just had different set of values, and it wasn't based on hierarchy or class oppression or sexism, if all of that, like, did not exist, then I think that we wouldn't be such a messed up society.
What I really loved on one of your podcasts, you were talking with some girls about pornography.
Oh, little girls, yeah.
In the 8th grade.
Yeah.
And these brave girls came on her podcast and were talking about their interaction with boys at their age and how boys were like getting fueled and amped up by looking at pornography on their phones. Right?
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I was so shocked. If you get a chance, anybody who's watching, go there and listen to this, because me as a 40-year-old guy, I'm like, my God, these kids are being exposed younger and younger, and no wonder the men are becoming predatory like this, because they are looking at these images they think they have to be like.
Yeah, I think it's more like, because I mean, there's predatory behavior since there's been societies, right? We've just fucked everything up completely when it comes to relationships. I remember first being exposed to adult material when I was in grade 8 as well, right? I just think it's the roles that are being played in pornography that's the problem, right? It's always domination of women, right? The whole spectrum of pornography is built that way, and it's funny you said that your wife or your wife, whatever you want to call it, wants you to take her last name.
She wants me to take her last name. Michael Ferreira. And I'm like, that sounds pretty dope, actually, Michael Ferreira.
Yeah.
I actually don't mind that. That's actually...
And that doesn't faze you?
Well, I asked for a hyphen, and that was a negotiation.
So you're kind of this new generation free thinker.
Yeah, you know what? I'm the kind of guy that's like, you know what? You're going to live, you're going to die. The only responsibility you have to yourself is to make some good relationships in life. Try to make some progress. Try to leave some sort of legend, some sort of like proof that you existed, that you changed the world, even just for a minute or somewhere around you, right? Or someone's life or something. And then just die. Get it over with, right? So whatever, you take someone's last name, you lose some genitalia, you recognize yourself as a different, pronoun. It doesn't matter, right? The point is that, you got to be happy and make people happy. Whatever you can do is make people happy. And if it makes her happy for me to take her, that's fine.
That's a good one. I think that you just summed up like what are the basics. It's like we're all gonna die, so it's just try. It really is that. I think build those good relationships and also leave that legacy. So, because that's all people are gonna really remember you by. Is what you leave behind. And
where can people find your work and things that you're working on?
Our website's great.
So constructingshard.com, that's where you can find me, and that's where I'm putting pretty much centralizing all my work. So writings, podcasts, webcomic, I'm trying to put together all of my feminist portraits, and then there'll be more in the future. So yeah, that's where that's where you guys can find me.
So there's more Misrepresent coming.
Yeah, and so I started my podcast like years ago, then I stopped, and then back in December I was part of a feminist panel about books and feminism, and I was looking around me and there were so many women that people don't know but are so intelligent and just incredible that I was like, okay, I have to start podcasting again because I have to get their stories down. Because even if nobody cares about who they are now or even cares about my podcast, at least I have their stories down, and that was more important to me than anything else. So there's definitely going to be more. May is going to be a really busy month with my podcast, so look out for that.
Awesome.
And then that's awesome, because that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this as well. And we have some great people that we know that are intelligent and brilliant. And honestly, I gotta say, I've been inspired by you a lot over the years. A lot of the work that you do. And and I want to let you know that for sure. And because it's always motivating to me for people that put social activism into their art. That's kind of, I've always been motivated by that, and that's kind of what I want to do with all my art as well. So hugely motivating seeing you do that. And your Instagram is Constructing Shar as well, right?
Yes, constructing_Shar. Yeah, and so a lot of things that I put up is there as well.
Amazing. Great having you.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, really nice great. One day we'll all meet in person, and you know what? We're going to have an event coming up that is going to invite all the guests back, and we're going to have a party.
Oh, awesome.
Well, can you still hear what we said? You can hear it, right? So we're going to have a party.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard everything.
So we'll invite you, and if we need to buffer the party, just invite the family. Just send a thing out to the fam, right? And get them all going, because we'll have like minute to win it games and stuff. We'll have some minute to win it games, team games, and stuff like that. So we'll really pump up the fun.
And hopefully be around people. And hopefully be around people.
And then you want Filipino people there, because they are going to be.
Oh, they bring the party. Come on, they have the magic mic and the dancing.
Yes.
The food.
So nice to meet you, Char. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, great having you.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was awesome.
For sure. Have a great night.